Welcome to Blood in the Snow Radio, where we give you the latest news and interviews with the best in Canadian genre cinema. Here are your hosts, Robert Bellamy and Festival Director Kelly Michael Stewart.
Welcome to a very special episode of Blood in the Snow Radio. Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great, especially for this episode. I've been kind of pumped because we're celebrating one of our legends.
Yeah, Romero passed away last week, and it might seem odd at first, someone listening to this, why a Canadian horror podcast would be talking about him. But George was a Canadian filmmaker in the end. He came to Canada in the early 2000s and became a Canadian citizen, and he lived here, and he made his last 4 films here.
Yes, yeah. I know some of my friends from Toronto have had the privilege of working on his sets.
Yeah, well, that's a strange thing. I mean, I only got to meet him, just for a photo and a couple of. I've been to a couple of Q&As with him and stuff like that. But I could probably name you 20 friends that either worked with him or were friends with him, or had something to do with him either personally or professionally in the last 15 years. And so it was always this strange 1 degree of separation with George Romero. He was part of. I always hear stories about him, people running into him at St. Lawrence Market, and obviously being local, he was able to go to more local conventions and special events and he really actually had quite an interesting impact on cinema here in the last decade. Really?
Now, you said there was a connection with Blood in the Snow.
Well, I mean, it's because of the situation. I mean, a couple of things. The very first year we had Blood in the Snow, we had a short film by a couple of Canadian filmmakers called Cinemall, which was about the famous mall from Dawn of the Dead that they did a little 15-minute documentary on that. So that was kind of our first connection to George with that. And then the second one, the filmmakers from that year, Chris Harrison and Phil Patterson, they did a film called Devil's Night. Now, that film had nothing to do with it, but what happened was they got, right around that time, rather than making a feature film, they decided to do a live play of Night of the Living Dead Live, which is very kind of similar. It was done in a very similar vein as the Evil Dead, the musical. In fact, they even had the same director for that. And it was a fantastic stage production that was done here in 2013. And it went for about 2 runs. I think they were hoping for it to expand farther, but I think it only did Toronto. But I saw it twice, and I actually got to watch. The first time I met George Romero was at the kind of like the test show for it. And so I was lucky enough to sit in the audience of maybe 10, 15 people with him watching. That was a surreal experience, watching Night of the Living Dead done live. Pretty much as a comedy and musical to some degree, with George in the audience watching this, and that was what made it so unique about being in Toronto, was the fact that they wouldn't have been able to put on this kind of show and have George's because they had him have his approval. Basically, it was he wasn't directly involved with the show, but they basically got his approval and license to do that. They didn't. They were such a huge fans of George. There was no way they were going to do it without him. Him involved in some way.
That is good, because in technicalities they didn't have to. That's fallen to public domain now.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone keeps doing all these little tributes by ripping off the film and stuff like that. So it was. So, and then they had John Russo and Russ Streiner, the original guys from Night of the Living Dead. They were very, very involved in it. And they even did a pilgrimage down to Pittsburgh to see where all the sets were and stuff for a lot of the promo of the show. And so I would see photos of that, and it was quite interesting to see that go on. And producers that have worked with him on different projects. I've seen them show up on films that play Blood in the Snow at later dates, and just the fact that it's fascinating. I think these last 4 films are should be revisited especially if you're from Toronto and you want to. I don't know if people realize how he, it was shot in and around, all these films were shot in and around Toronto. The first film he did here was called Bruiser, which is very rarely seen. Didn't do very well. I think he made it around 2000 and year 2000. And he wasn't a citizen then. He just came up to do the movie, but I think he really liked Toronto, and then he moved here a few years later. And but it's interesting. You can see that famous old building in front of St. Lawrence Market with that. There's like a mural of like windows and stuff like that, and a key scene in that film happens there. But the best example is in Land of the Dead, where the big place where everyone hides out in. Fiddler's Green is actually the food court where I used to go to every single day when I used to work on Bay Street years ago. And so it was so funny watching that movie. I'm like, oh yeah, this is my food court. I mean, it was kind of like we're in the Monroeville Mall kind of thing like that, just having my lunch. And this is where Dawn of the Dead was shot. So we had, obviously the second Dead trilogy didn't have the impact of the first, but it was still funny. Like Pittsburgh got the first half and we got the second half.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's got to be surreal, like you said, sitting in the actual spot where you're watching the film. Yeah,
exactly. And so it was. So I always heard all these little interesting stories about him and people. I had a lot of common friends, and our guest on this show we chose was my friend and colleague Chris Alexander. And I'll give you an example of like just how the strange world we lived in with him when George was alive and living here. Is I was supposed to have coffee or drinks or whatever with Chris one day, and he texted me and said, "I'm going to be 20 minutes late. I'm at George Romero's house." and I said, "Wow, that is the best excuse for being late I can possibly imagine. I can't think of a better excuse than that." And I just realized, wow, what a strange situation and lucky situation we are as Torontonians have with him that he was here.
Yeah, that's not an excuse you can be mad at. Not at all.
Yeah. But further than that, I mean, just in general about George Romero. I mean, reflecting on, I think he really set the template for how you make an indie film. I think the films that we do see and play at Blood in the Snow really come from the template that George did. And what I mean is, he didn't work in the Hollywood system. He did his films either out of Pittsburgh or Toronto. He really didn't. He never sold out. And he did most of his films, except for, I'd say, Land of the Dead. He really did them for very small micro budgets and kind of that. And it was very much do it yourself. I mean, when you watch Dawn of the Dead, there's a relatability factor to it that you can look at that film and kind of go, wow, I could go make that. I mean, just from a technical point of view. I mean, it's not that outrageous. I know people have made even bigger films than that on an indie level. And, he was doing it when no one else was doing it. It was kind of either Hollywood or bust in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And now we take for granted that anyone can pick up a camera and go make their own indie film with all their friends. And George was doing it for decades.
Exactly. And then if I'm not mistaken, too, I think the very first film you screened at the first Blood in the Snow was Sick, which is the zombie-style movie. Yeah, obviously, there was even, I think Ryan Andrews even put little homages to some of them. I think there was the calendar from Day of the Dead that was in that, and there was definitely little things like that. We even, in my film, Late Night Double Feature, we even did a little homage to Day of the Dead, where there's a scene where a guy's guts gets ripped out, just like that, and just that key scene in there, and that was kind of like, and I remember going, wow, this will be just like Day of the Dead. And so there's always those little things though too, and yeah, you're right. I mean, certainly he had a huge influence on people making those types of movies. Oh yeah, now I know I can't look at films, like especially the zombies type films, but any type of horror films, and even if I'm putting together one, without remembering all the trivia I know from Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead and all the effects that they use, the practical stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing too. I mean, obviously they didn't have a lot of resources, and I think that's also a tribute to Tom Savini's early work. I mean, he was just worked with what he had, and obviously, you look at the zombies, especially in Dawn of the Dead, they're nothing even remotely close to what's going on in The Walking Dead and things like that. But they had such a style to it, just like it was. I don't think it was really intended to have those weird shades of colors in the skin, but that's just how it kind of turned out. And it made it, but because of that, it made the film highly original.
Now, without further ado, let's get on to our first guest and welcome on to our show, Chris Alexander.
You might know Chris as the editor of Delirium Magazine, Shock to the Drop. He's a filmmaker as well and a composer, and all-around great guy. So so I thought you would have some really great insights on his life and his legacy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's still kind of surreal that I am any kind of authority on this guy on a personal level, which just blows my mind. But that's the way the world works. But I mean, when I was a kid, first of all, I just came back from the family memorial yesterday, and the fact that I was there was weird. But there was some of the Pittsburgh people were there. Greg Nicotero, Savini, cast of like Dawn of the Dead, and like some of those lifers from Pittsburgh were there. But I'd say about 70% of the people that were attending outside of his own immediate family were his Toronto family. They were all the people that he worked with here. And they were like a family. They followed him usually from picture to picture because George was a loyal guy. Like if you worked with George, you'd never work with George just once if he liked you. You'd pretty much stick around, and maybe you wouldn't be the star in the next movie, but you'd find like John Amplas, for instance, who was the star of Martin. Was the casting director in Dawn of the Dead, and then was the zombie in Creepshow, and then one of the co-stars of Day of the Dead. I mean, John Harrison, who was a zombie in Dawn of the Dead, came back to do the soundtrack, the score for Creepshow and Day of the Dead, and then directed George's Tales from the Dark Side movie. So he'd always work with the same people over and over, because I think that was paramount with George. He just wanted to have fun. Filmmaking was always fun to him. And I learned that firsthand as far as like getting FaceTime with him and having a relationship with him. That if he liked you, then you definitely you were going to stick around. My first encounter was as a kid, like all of us. Usually most of us, I think, were reading Fangoria, because if there was no Fangoria, there was no George or Tom Savini, there would be no Fangoria. It was that first issue of the magazine that they profiled Dawn of the Dead, and all those amazing effects were splattered across the pages. And that's the people's response to that shock and awe is what made that magazine choose the path to be a graphic horror magazine. I never thought I'd meet George, but I guess Pittsburgh came to Toronto when he moved here.
So when was the first time that you met him and in Toronto and how that first came about?
Well, it was because of the Fangoria things. My first gig at Fango was to go on set for Diary of the Dead, which he shot in 2006, which I was incredibly excited about because I'd never met George in my life. And I no such thing as a serious horror journalist. It's really just a bunch of fans that somehow miraculously, maybe if you're lucky, get paid to do what you love. But, I stumbled onto the set, and Fangoria at that time, I was not running it, but they had a lot of money, and they gave me all this money to do. Like they hired me a union crew, and we made a documentary on set. And I was in the face of everybody there, for 5 visits to this set. It was crazy. And I remember the first time I met him in his trailer, I was shaking. I remember that. I couldn't breathe. I think I had too much coffee. I was trying to overcompensate. And he knew that. And he was so patient and kind, because he knew that I was just a fanboy pretending to be a journalist. And I was asking the same questions he'd been asked a gazillion times, but it didn't matter. He just gave me that time. And you really felt when you're with George, and a lot of people have said this, that there was nobody else in the world. You were the only person there. Like you were the only person that he cared about. Even though he was in the middle of making a movie, what you were asking him and the conversation, the dialogue you were having was very, very important to him. It was the only thing that mattered. At least he gave you that impression. He was just that nice of a guy.
Well, I was at the public memorial the day before, and that was the impression I got talking to people there. I mean, this wasn't like, hey, I'm a fan, I want to come out and just pay tribute. I think there was a bit of that, but I mean, it was also very personal. This felt different than other times like that, because I think because he was in our backyard and he was there and he was so down to earth. I think everyone just felt like he was just part of the family here, and it just
I totally agree. He never put on airs in the sense that he'd make himself unavailable. He was always around, and he lived to watch movies and make movies. He was a creative guy, and if you ever hung out with him, all he did was want to talk about movies. That's how we became friends, not because of the horror stuff. I mean, the last thing he wanted to talk about really was another goddamn zombie movie. But, you know, he wanted to talk about Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, you know. I mean, my first real connection with him outside of, you know, doing stuff to promote the movie was we went out for lunch one time. He took me out for lunch to there's a little sushi place at the base of his apartment on the Esplanade. And if you knew George, you'd always end up in that sushi restaurant, right? They loved George. He was like a god to them. And anyways, he took me there and we just started talking about movies, and that's all we did. And he mentioned this movie. He's like, you know, there's this movie I saw as a kid, Wind Across the Everglades with Burl Ives, and I can't find it anywhere. And I said, you know, it was 2006. I wasn't really plugged in too hard to the internet in the sense that I wasn't downloading movies or doing anything like that. And I said, look, have you tried eBay? He's like, of course I tried eBay. I can't find it. It doesn't exist. It never came out on video. And I couldn't believe that. So I made it my mission to try and find Wind Across the Everglades. And it took me 6 months I had dial-up internet too. So I was trying to like go in torrents. And one time it took me 2 days to try to get this movie. And it eventually was like a 2-minute clip from the movie that came out of it. I'm like, oh my God, I'll never find it. So I got some help from some geek friend of mine, and eventually 6 months later, I managed to get Wind Across the Everglades. But I mean, during this time, we were emailing back and forth and trying to like duel with classic film trivia to each other. And he'd always sign off as one character, and then I'd bounce back signing off as another character or an actor related to the film that he was alluding to. So it became this kind of war. And after 6 months, I found the movie, burned a copy, made my own little clamshell case with the poster and everything else, and got on that train and from Oakville, where I live, and down to Union Station, walked from Union to his apartment on the Esplanade, and handed it to him. And that was it. That was 10 years. That was 11 years ago. And we stayed really. I mean, we had so many little weird adventures. But like you say, I mean, you forget. There was different versions of George that people knew. There was the myth. There was the guy that, for most of us, sparked our imaginations as children, and was our constant friend in loving the genre, the legend. And then there was Uncle George, like just a sweet old guy who just loved to hang out with and drink scotch with and laugh. And so, yeah, you kind of, I'd say take him for granted, but he certainly just became one of your buddies, you know. You didn't really think that, you know, he wasn't a pretentious guy. He didn't put on airs, you know.
Well, I mean, it's hard. It's when someone passes, the first thing, I mean, at least I do, is you start reflecting on their legacy. And I got wondering, and I wanted to ask you, Chris, how did he feel about his own place and everything? Because he had such an eclectic career where really, I mean, he was so revered for so many films, but at the same time, he had a hard time getting finance for a lot of these dream projects. And like you said too, he didn't want to be just labeled as the zombie guy. He did have interests in other kinds of films. And I was wondering, did he ever speak to you about that kind of stuff? Or
sure, he did, and I think he spoke to all of us with just in the choices of movies that he would make. But no, he absolutely spoke about that. I remember him wistfully every time Oscar season would come out. You know, I'm a member of the Toronto Film Critics Association. He's a member of the Academy. So we'd get the same screeners sent to us. So we'd be able to watch these movies often first. And so we just, you know, him and myself and his wife, Suze, his lovely wife, Suze, we just like share all our thoughts on all these different movies and debate on what was good, what was bad, and what we liked. I remember him wistfully just saying, you know, Chris, all I want to do is make The White Balloon. That's all I want to do. He just wanted to make like a quiet, like intimate art house movie, but no one would give him any money. And I said, listen, why don't we just scrape up a few $1,000 and just film some weird little Repulsion-esque movie in your apartment? He says, I'd love to, but, you know, I need my pension from the Directors Guild. I can't go outside of that. I have to, you know, play by the rules to some degree because I rely on that money. And so he was kind of caught in that respect. However, it would have been very easy for George to sell out. Mm-hmm. You know, you look at the guy who made Night of the Living Dead and pretty much transformed, defined the contemporary, never mind zombies, but just the contemporary graphic horror film. That was George who did that inadvertently, but he did it. He could have chased that with Night of the Living Dead too. Instead, he made There's Always Vanilla, psychedelic comedy, right? And then 10 years later, he does it again with Dawn, and he could have made Dawn of the Dead 2 immediately after. Instead, he makes Night Riders, for Christ's sake. I mean, he would never do the same movie twice, and that goes for his Dead movies. Every single one of them is completely different than the last, and that's why I think in everything post Dawn, and that includes Day, because Day of the Dead was not loved when it came out.
No.
It took some time, as they all do, but every single.
And you're right, like Night Riders. I think that in a way is almost almost his most autobiographical film, because it's just like, cause that was
yeah, I'd say, you know what it is. It's him. I love it when George gets personal, because that's his King Arthur movie, and that's his movie about the death of the old gods, and I find Survival of the Dead to be a kind of the zombie version of Knight Riders in many respects. It's a melancholy movie about the passing of a time that no longer exists. You know, it's a real salute to the Hollywood that he remembers of his youth.
Mm. And, you know, what do you think? Like, do you think a lot of the films now, well, one thing I think also happens when a filmmaker passes, that people start to go back and revisit certain films. And one film in particular that I agree with you, Chris, it got a really bad rap when it came out, was his last film, Survival of the Dead. And you're doing a special screening of that coming up soon. And I always thought that film didn't get the respect it deserved.
No, but they none of them did, because every single, again, he said this too, and you know, because Dawn of the Dead's my favorite movie of all time,
right?
For on every level, and not just horror film, just film. You know, I think it's just a great movie. And that was the problem. He says, you know, Dawn of the Dead, sure, okay, great, but now everybody wants Dawn of the Dead. That's what they want every time. But he refused to give that to them. So Day didn't do well. Land, you know, fans sneered at that. Diary, they sneered at that. And Survival, they really sneered at that, because Survival is a romp. You know, it's a throwback to the time when movies were fun, and people didn't want to laugh at the dead. You know, they wanted a big, serious epic, because the new generation had been conditioned so hard on the post-Romero zombie stuff that was harder edged and bloodier and nastier and more cynical. Right. And Survival is the opposite of that. It's borderline whimsical. So of course it got a bad rap. But if I've seen it a few times since, and I liked it the first time. I was a little bit. You have to get into its groove. Once you know what to expect, I think it's outside of Knight Riders his most personal movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also the problem too, you know, looking back, is I think because he did the second, there was that huge gap between Day and Land, but then he kind of did Diary and Survival pretty much, you know, 2 years apart, I think, kind of thing like that after that. So it was kind of like, I think there was like this brief 4-year period where I think we were a little spoiled, frankly. I mean, he was off the map for a while in the late 90s, and then and Bruiser really didn't make much of an impact, but then he did these 3 films right back to back, and I think it was kind of like when it got into Diary and Survival, it was like, oh, just another Romero Dead movie. I mean,
and not only that, but just another Dead movie, period. Because, you know, he wouldn't have made Land of the Dead if it wasn't for the success of Resident Evil and 28 Days Later, and then the Dawn of the Dead remake of all things. So at that point, there was no, as you know, and to this day, there's no stopping. I always say that as a guy who makes his living primarily watching other people's movies and talking about them. Mm-hmm. I open my mailbox still every time, and most of the independent movies that come out of it are zombie movies, because they're cheap to make. And so there's this glut of zombie movies out there, and most of them aren't that great. So Survival was not an event movie when it came out. It was just really sold and marketed by its distributor, which I believe was Magnolia, as just kind of like another zombie movie, you know?
Well, it was practically VOD. Like, I don't even remember it really doing any kind of theatrical, hardly. Like,
no. Yeah. And neither did Diary. I mean, that was the Weinsteins had that, and they pretty much dumped that movie too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was strange. Yeah.
Well, even Land of the Dead, man. I mean, it wasn't really. They rushed that to. They changed the date on that for its release, and then they kind of rushed it. And there weren't even many TV spots when that movie came out. Mm-hmm. So Universal didn't even really support Land of the Dead very well either. So that was kind of his curse, you know. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
He was never respected, man. I got to say that by the big guys, because he never played the game. I think right to his dying day, you know, with all the projects that he was trying to get off the ground, he was a rebel to the end. Like I say, he never sold out. He always remained independent, and he was also spoiled by that, because after Night, even though he got fucked over with the royalties and everything else with the slipping into the public domain, it made him an above the credits guy, where he always contractually got final cut. Every time he watched a Romero movie, it was a Romero movie. You know, it was his baby from start to finish. And so I think he never had to really play the game like a lot of these guys do.
Right.
You know, so he was always an independent. He was an angry young man to the day he died at the age of 77. Good man.
Yeah, and there was in one project that you just finished working on. It was just announced just before his passing. is this really interesting. I'm really fascinated by this DVD compilation that's coming to get out this fall from Romero Films, Between Night and Dawn, and it's about about his films between those two landmark films, and there's this whole documentary that you actually directed Guillermo del Toro with him, and
yeah, no, that was crazy because it took, again, George was very excited about it. You know, I do work for Arrow when I can, and they wanted to do. The initial plan was they were going to release, and I don't know who has the rights now or what's happening. There's all kinds of skullduggery, but they were going to release the whatever it is now, 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead. Is that where we're at? Or are we at 60 years now? 50, right?
50.
I think it's 50.
Yeah, and it was like a big deal, and it was going to be a 4K scan and the whole 9 yards with this thing. I don't know what happened to that, but they'd also licensed the rights to the other films. So, A, the feature that we were designing was originally meant to be part of the Night, and B, we didn't really know what we were going to do. Just George talking about his career, and I came up with this idea, like, look, I know Del Toro's here in Toronto too, and he's such a fan. Why not see if we can sync this guy up? And I don't know if anyone knows Del Toro, but he's probably the most prolific motherfucker alive. The guy never stops working, and so to try to track him down and keep him in one place for anything is almost impossible. And it took us almost 2 years to sync up George's and Guillermo's schedules so that we could get him over to George's house and sit him down and make this thing happen. So, I would book time with Guillermo and he's all set. And then like the day before he would cancel. And then I think George was too happy about that. So he'd say, I'm not doing it. Anyways, it was this whole Herculean thing to get this thing together, but we did eventually. And it was an incredible experience because all we did, very simple setup, is bring these two titans together and sit them down on a couch without very minimal prompting. And, 2 cameras, and just get Guillermo just to talk to George, not about himself or not about filmmaking or not about pop culture, but just about George's work. And anyone who knows Del Toro, if anyone has seen his amazing master classes at TIFF, or this guy knows everything about everything, and he's got this.
Oh, that's a statement. I've been to quite a few of them, and it's unbelievable. Yeah.
And he's got a photographic memory where he get everything is in his mind, boom, 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 and he just goes, and he doesn't need. I had to prompt him a few times, that's actually a funny anecdote in itself because Del Toro does not like being directed, or let's put it that way. But anyways, he would just go off and back to George about how he felt about his films, which you asked me earlier. He knew about, obviously was very aware of his legacy, but I think he was always quite apologetic about his movies. I don't think he ever made the movie he wanted to make. And sometimes when people really analyzed his movies, as Del Toro did that day, and particularly was talking about Night Riders, at one point, and you'll see it in the interview when it comes out in October, George starts to tear up. He starts to get weepy because somebody has looked so deep into his soul, into this personal film that he made that really nobody liked when it came out, nobody really saw or cared about. And has seen all this beauty and this poetry that George had so lovingly put into this piece of work. And it was really meant something to him. So it is a really beautiful, historic. It's about an hour and 10 minutes chat between these two amazing people about George's work, and I'm just so glad we were able to bank that in time before, obviously, so close to when we lost him. I
was just going to say, because that always amazed me. I noticed you were talking about it earlier about the 2 different Romeros. There was the one everyone saw, as opposed to the one he was. I've heard that many times about his set. His set wasn't necessarily a running set. It was a family function.
Oh, yeah, and he was so collaborative, too. And I've been on many of, well, at least 2 of his films extensively. And that's why everybody loved him, because if people had ideas, he'd listen. He wasn't a ball breaker. He'd listen to you,
Exactly, and that was my appeal. Like, I was like you. You saw Night of the Living Dead, and the one that really drew me to him was Monkey Shines.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting point of entry. I literally know nobody whose point of entry with Romero was Monkey Shines. That's amazing. Well,
I have to say that was my second. My first, obviously, Night of the Living Dead. That's the one that got me. And then when I started looking through his filmography, it was Monkey Shines that really attracted me. And I love that film. But again, like you said, there's not very many people that have actually seen that.
Well, because, again, Day of the Dead comes out. I don't think critically not so well. I think maybe it financially did so well, but he could have kept going on that dead zone, and he didn't. Instead, he goes and makes Monkey Shines, which is not only a left field choice for him. It's just the movie itself is kind of an anomaly. I mean, there's not too many movies about paraplegics or quadriplegics who have control of whatever kind of monkey that was. I mean, it's such a weird movie, right?
Exactly, but
and because it's a hard movie to market too, I think, and that's why I don't think it did very well.
But see, and I think that's where George was lost to the, I guess, higher ups. I guess I would use that term. To them, it looked like he was just a zombie guy.
Well, and that's like, I think with any of these guys, and you look at all the guys that transformed the genre, that pack of, I don't know what the Splat Pack is what they call the newfangled pack of them, like the James Wands and everything. I don't know what you'd call the original guard from the 60s and the 70s. All the post Romero guys. So, you got Romero, Carpenter, Wes Craven, David Cronenberg. Who would be the other guy? Toby Hooper, I guess.
Yeah.
All these guys, first and foremost, were filmmakers, and most of them just loved movies or loved something else outside. They weren't trying to make horror. They weren't trying to pay homage to horror movies that they saw. And I think that's what's wrong with this current crop of horror filmmakers or younger filmmakers, that all they've seen is horror movies. But guys like Romero and Craven and John Carpenter and even say William Friedkin, who made The Exorcist. Christ, I mean, none of these guys were trying to make horror movies. They were trying to make movies first and foremost about characters and stories and themes and commentary on the world that they were living in, and they were just using the genre as a tool. Mm-hmm. And I think that's totally George. If you look at Dawn of the Dead, which again, my favorite movie, yeah, the zombie scenes are amazing, and then the punchlines to the jokes, but the big attraction, I think the best scene in the movie, the best, is the scene where the two characters, Galen Ross and David MG, Flyboy and Fran, are lying in bed, and they've been trapped in the mall for a long time, and it seemed idyllic for a while that they had all their material needs at their fingertips, but then eventually they've got it all. There's nowhere to go. They can't escape. And they're sitting there in bed, and it's a shot that pulls out from an intimate two-shot into this wide shot of the two of them, and neither of them are facing each other, and it's wordless, and it's like a photograph almost. It's a little work of art in and of itself. It's like that scene in Citizen Kane, with the breakdown of the marriage, but in one shot. Mm. And to me, that's George at his all-time best, and that's embedded in the middle of this apocalyptic gore movie. And that's what these guys did so well back then, just great filmmaking first and horror movies second. So, of course, George always had to exploit his legacy in order to make Westerns and in order to make, war movies and character dramas and all the things that his Dead movies are, and so that the marketing people could sell them as horror movies, right?
But see, I think that's where he got lost, though, is because everybody wanted George for the zombie films. Yeah. But then when they got him, it's like, oh, well, it's just another zombie film.
So, well, that's it. And I think the audience, even some of them, like, I think a lot of I'm convinced that half the audience that's seen Dawn of the Dead or any of them that don't even see the social commentary of it, and they're just watching it at face value, which you can and enjoy. But I think there's almost two audiences. I think there's the audience that kind of sees what the themes and stories that George is trying to say, and then there's the other side that I think we're just looking for the
Frisians. Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that too, because as you know, Dawn had 3 different cuts, but really only two of them were really, really released. And the Italian cut, called Zombie, that Dario Argento supervised, it pretty much eliminated almost all of the social commentary and all the humor and all the music and all the little eccentricities of George's cut, and focused almost primarily on the action and the gore, right? And some people prefer the Italian cut, and you can kind of draw the line in the sand between different kinds of horror fans to see which cut of Dawn you prefer. The one that's pretty much just a straight up horror movie and survivalist action movie, or the one that's a little more meandering and esoteric, and that is true for sure.
But those are the precursors, I guess, to what you'd call the Walking Dead drama, because people applaud Walking Dead because it's more of a social interactive story about humanity as opposed to zombies. But that's exactly what they were back then. Even in '68, that first one.
That's what George, and that's why George was never quite at peace with the fact that The Walking Dead is not only popular, but is, I think, still the most successful show on television as an industry in and of itself. And there's George trying to scramble $1.99 together to get another movie made. I mean, that was always a point of frustration. It's not that he thought that the show, and he's been very vocal about that. It's not that he thought the show was bad. It's not bad. Walking Dead is an excellent show, but it's not that he thought it was bad. I think he just had this just real, disenfranchised feeling about the industry and how he was essentially the comics and the show not just borrowed from him, but wholeheartedly stole from his whole mythology, and yet he couldn't get his own stuff off the ground.
Huge.
Well, that's what happened. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing going back to Day of the Dead really hindered that movie was because of Return of the Living Dead had such a huge impact the year before. And I think that started from that film on, that kind of started that pattern. I mean, by the time the second trilogy, again, what I'm saying is that wasn't really appreciated. Also because of so many other films that were, Zombieland and we could sit here and go on and name them all off, but they were, way more financially successful than his films. And it was such a strange time to have these George Romero films coming out, and yet the new crop were the ones overtaking it financially anyway.
Well, this is what happens, and I mean, we can lament on this pattern, but I mean, unfortunately, this is the way it works. You make your movies because you want to make them, or you paint your pictures because you want to paint it. You make your music because you want to make it. If it hits commercially, great. But then what'll happen is it'll be assimilated into the pop culture. One generation will pass that mythology on to the next, and they're going to take it and mash it up with something that they're interested in and reinvent it and make it something new and to reflect their times. And so I think with George, and it's not a criticism of his work, and it's not really a criticism of the changes in pop culture either. It's just the way it works, is that the times change, but the artist doesn't necessarily change with them. I don't think Survival of the Dead is, I think, a fun, great personal George Romero movie. I don't think, again, it's not a contender in the landscape of the demands of younger people and what they need from their zombie entertainment today, and that's just the way it is.
Although I'll say the one film where I think both the commercial and the artistic thing came together in a perfect blend was Creepshow. I think that movie, kind of like really, it really, obviously did very well financially, and also, but also just like I think it's one. I would go on record and say it's the best anthology film ever made. So.
Oh yeah, Creepshow's one of my. Creepshow's the first. I think I saw it before Dawn. I think it was the first Romero movie I saw. I didn't know it was a Romero movie. I saw it with my mom on cable in 1982, and blew my mind because I had read EC Comics, so I knew that style, and this is before the Tales from the Crypt show. I mean, this was such a big movie for me personally, but to this day, I still think it's just badass. It's George at his best. It's also George at his most collaborative. However, if you asked George about that, and again, many, many, many conversations, too many to count, sitting down, having scotch, talking about movies, come back to Creepshow. He was never felt that movie was his. He felt more like he was trying to impress Stephen King. And so in many respects, yeah, it's George. It's a really great movie, but George himself was never quite felt that it was his movie, But this is an interesting point too, because George really wasn't known for too many collaborations with other people outside of Stephen King, and maybe we should have seen more collaborations with George and other people,
Well, yeah, no, I think it was. I mean, I can see where he would think that because it's not. Because it doesn't have his signature on it the way he would ever films. You don't go like that. But just the nature of it too. I mean, you're riffing on EC Comics and you're working with Stephen King. But I think I'm a big believer in film as a collaborative medium, and sometimes you can get some of your best work by working with other people. So that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and Creepshow too is this. In many ways, it's one of those movies that where everything just happens, and you don't know why it happens, but it does. There's happy accidents that make movies masterpieces. But Creepshow's also really benefits from its cast. What an amazing cast of legends and rising stars like Ed Harris and guys like Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, who were contemporary scream queens at the time. Like, there's so many different people in that cast that are, and everyone is universally excellent. It's a movie that fires on every cylinder. I 100% agree.
Yeah. Cool. One of you have a unique thing in history where you had a figurine made. You were collaborating with him for a figurine made, and you have a severed head. You have a severed head of yourself.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Not too many people can say that.
No, it was just one of those weird things that, again, I became really close with George and his wife, Suze. It's just, again, I can't say enough good things about her. And they were always very sweet to me. They have a condo. I wanted to bring my kids downtown on comic book trips and stuff. They'd let us use their condo. I mean, they're just really, really great and open people. And so we'd get around talking about projects. And I guess one of the things that, listen, they all do it. So they go to these big stars, these big, genre stars. They supplement their incomes between projects by doing conventions. And George was always constantly traveling to conventions. And without naming the sum that he would get, let's just say that he got a pretty penny, right? Mm-hmm. For appearing, and good on him. And he also just loved to travel, so it was fun for him. And he loved meeting his fans. And if you ever met George at any of these conventions, that he'd stop and he'd talk to you and he'd make time for you. But one of the things that we talked about was, creating stuff for his conventions, stuff that he could sell. So we came up with this sculptrate thing. I guess somebody had approached him about doing a 3-dimensional scan of himself. So then he's like, well, why don't we do it so that you can get your head, or holding your head. And I said, well, this is a pretty good idea. I don't know how much would it cost. It seems a little bit crazy. And it was a little bit crazy. But they said, listen, we want to make you the prototype. I'm like, what? And I said, yeah, we want to make you the prototype there so we can use that as the model. Maybe that was his mistake. I don't know. So we went into the studio together and we scanned George all up and did him. And then they scanned me all up and then cut my head off and then created this like high quality, it was like 10-inch, 12-inch tall sculpture thing. So we made it and we have it and I have it and it was given to me and George personalized it and signed it and we sat on it and then just really didn't do anything with it. We were going to start marketing these things and just life happened and we just stopped. So I'm stuck with this fascinating one-shot thing that never came to much, but I was the prototype. So my legacy in a weird way is forever married to George in this whatever resin, I don't even know what the hell it is, substance. And it's sitting in my house encased in its plastic case with George's writing all over it. And it's just one of those fascinating, weird little things. And that I did with the guy. Yeah. It's hard to believe he's gone, to be perfectly honest. He was just, like I go back to the beginning, what I said is there were two versions of George to me, in that there was George the myth, George the God, and then there was George the guy I just liked being around, talking about movies and having fun with. And I guess there's a third one too, and it's the version of George that I'm now passing on to my kids, watching the movies and telling stories about George, and just a major impact in my life, and I feel very blessed and honored for having that experience, that one-of-a-kind real experience with this man.
Oh, wow, it's fantastic, Chris. I'm glad you have memories,
And see, that does have to be weird with people coming up and talking to you because of the fact that, like you said, he's a legend. And to me, you're someone that knows a legend, but to him, he is your friend. Yeah,
that's all a perspective, right? And so, and it gets past, but I never got past the being, and I guess most people, and at this family memorial yesterday was extraordinary. There's even guys like Nicotero would get up, and Nicotero has the same story I would tell, exactly the same. This kid in Pittsburgh who worshipped George as a little boy, and ended up going to Italy with his family on a vacation, and there he goes to a restaurant, and there's Dario Argento and Romero having dinner. He's like, and then he got the courage to talk to George. I mean, he was just a fanboy first, and then he just hung around a lot, and George just eventually invited him on set and gave him some jobs to do, and so everyone kind of has the same experience with George, where you come to him as a fan first. If he likes you, he brings you under his arm, and suddenly you're part of his family. It was his big extended family. But I never lost sense that he was the guy that made Dawn of the Dead, man. I'll never forget. He would always buy me dinner, right? Always. I never paid. And then one night, his with my ex-wife, they took my ex-wife and out for dinner. It's great dinner, and at the end of it, I actually, for once in my life, had a little bit of money, And I was like, nope, I'm paying for this. And I walked up and boom, down goes the credit card. And I paid for this dinner, and I felt so proud of myself. And I remember just lying in bed awake. I couldn't sleep, just staring, going, dude, you bought the guy made Dawn of the Dead dinner today. It's like, you never, the absurdity of it, that this is something you never entertained in a million years as a child would ever be part of a chapter in your life at all. Just stunning, really.
Well, that might answer the question I was about to ask you, because everybody, especially when these things come around and you have to remember somebody, what is the one key moment that you'll always remember with him? That might be it.
That was for sure. I don't know. I was trying to figure that out, and I think there was too many. There was too many to go over, but I think that was probably the one that sticks out of my head, where it just kind of hit you like a cold shock. Actually, no, there was too many of them. I remember one after Survival of the Dead. He took me out again for dinner to that same goddamn sushi restaurant, and we started talking about movies. And John Harrison was supposed to be composing the score for Survival of the Dead, and he dropped out because I think he was doing the Dune remake or something, and the miniseries. And he says, like, hey, Chris, you want to score this thing? I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you want to do it? Just, come bring your guitar to the studio. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah. So it's like, I was on board to do the score for Survival of the Dead. And I remember almost crashing my car on the way home because I couldn't fucking focus. I couldn't think. I was like, well, blah, 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 blah. Now I never got the gig. I would say saner heads, but I don't think so, because I think Survival score is probably its weakest link. And that's not me being bitter about it. I just think it's a very nondescript score. But I didn't get it, but it didn't matter because I was asked. And I think that was probably the most mind-blowing, like, what the hell moment with him. That even there was a potential that I would have been able to, that I was asked to maybe potentially score a George Romero movie was pretty amazing.
That is crazy.
Yeah. But all in all, like I say, just at the end of the day, as I met a lot of guys in this industry. We all have, but I've met most of my heroes, and I've met, a lot of A-list, a lot of D-list. It doesn't matter. But I've never met a guy whose personality exceeds expectations of what the myth will be, like George. I mean, again, I challenge you to find anybody who's had any time with him, long-term or short-term, to have anything bad to say about the guy. It's almost impossible to find anybody in the great unwashed masses that you can say that about, let alone somebody who's changed the face of pop culture, at least 2 times over. I mean, it's almost impossible. So, one of the greats.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And again, back to the whole point of the show is that, and you mentioned at the beginning, is that we at the end of the day, the fact that we're even, our little chunk of the earth, Canada, can claim George as one of our own in his last chapter is pretty remarkable in and of itself. So
yeah. We were lucky to have him. We're lucky. I look at it this way: we were lucky to have George Romero. And we were extra lucky that we got to live in Fiddler's Green and live in this little part of part of the universe for a few years.
Yeah, our little pocket, our little generation here of people that got a chance to hang out with them for sure. Yeah. My Survival of the Dead screening at the Royal is on August 6th. I don't know when this is going to air, but if it goes to air before August 6th, pretty much the entire cast and crew will be there to have a memorial with George. We're gonna have like a little after party. We can hang out and talk to some of those guys and have fun. Also, there'll be a George Romero trailer reel at 7:00 if you come early. It's on screen at 8. And a portion of each ticket sales will be going towards the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, because that's where George was treated in his final days. So you should come out.
You said August 6th?
August 6th, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to mark that in my calendar.
Yeah, please come out.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Join us next time for Blood in the Snow Radio. Bits Radio is a production of Three Evil Cats Productions in association with the Blood in the Snow Canadian Film Festival. For more information and to listen to other episodes, visit bloodinthesnow.ca and tweet us at BitsFilmFest. Music by Jan Gorman, produced and edited by Kelly Michael Stewart. I am Eduardo Correa Lima. Till next time.